So last week we started with an introduction to these lectures, general introduction, and we said we are going to examine 4 points. First point, what is philosophy of law? Second point, what is legal theory? Is it something different from philosophy of law, or just the same science? Third point, if legal theory is something different from philosophy of law, we have to make a choice. Indeed, these lectures have the title Philosophy of Law, but it's well known that in some universities in Europe, people who are saying they are teaching philosophy of law, actually they are teaching law theory, legal theory. So we have to make a choice. It is at least a difference of approach. And we have to make a choice. That means we have to decide how we are going to treat the matter. And now there is a fourth question we have to think about. It is the origin of philosophy of law. This is the fourth question. Now we have already discussed about the meaning of philosophy of law, and we have begun to speak about legal theory, which some lawyers call jurisprudence or theory of law. It depends on the authors. Now, I don't remember exactly where I stopped last week. Since I'm old, I'm forgetting everything, but I guess I spoke to you about John Austin. No? Yes? Maybe? Maybe. I spoke to you about John Austin, who can be regarded as the founder of legal theory. And what Austin wrote in his books, mainly in the book which title is the philosophy of positive law, he wrote that in order to think properly the matter of right and of law, one should take only in account the positive law, the existing laws, and not an ideal justice or a natural law. According to Austin, there is nothing such as natural law, or at least it's just a fiction. It's just a concept in which everybody can put something, but on which nobody will agree. On the contrary, positive law is something which is which can be determined very easily. It's just the existing laws. You have just to watch to the existing laws. So it's not very serious to deal with philosophy of law regarding only a natural law on which nobody agree. On the contrary, positive law is something on which everybody can agree because it exists. It's not a fiction. This is the very simple point of view of John Austin. Maybe John Austin is not conscious of it, but he's under the influence of a global trend which is aiming to liberate itself from the domination of philosophy. I mean that since the 17th century and more in the 18th century, the sciences which were regarded as part of the philosophy pretend to become independent from philosophy. Physics, mathematics, and later in the 19th century, history, psychology, sociology, and law. This is just a global trend. If we get back to the Descartes tree. I spoke about Descartes tree, the tree of Descartes. You know, he told philosophy is just like a tree. The roots are the metaphysic, the trunk is physics, and the different branches are mechanic, medicine, moral. So in the century of Descartes, philosophy was regarded as dominating all the other sciences. And philosophy was not only metaphysics, that means the roots of the trees, but extend itself to physics, explaining the physical phenomenon, and to moral, mechanic, and medicine. That was a traditional point of view about philosophy. For instance, if we go back to Aristotle, this is German, Aristotle. If we go back to Aristotle, we see that among the books he wrote, there was a book which was called Ethic. It was a moral book. There was a book which was called Politics, in plural, which dealt with political philosophy. But there was also a book which was called Physics, and which dealt with natural phenomenon. And there was a book, or at least several little books, which were called, after Aristotle's death, metaphysics. The word metaphysics is not from Aristotle. It's some centuries later, but a scholar which was in the trend of Aristotle, he decided to publish the books, Aristotle's books, and he found some treatises, separate treatises, little treatises, which were dealing with something which was not in physics. So he didn't know, this guy, he was Andronicus of Rhodes, you know, the island. This guy, Andronicus of Rhodes, when he decided to publish Aristotle's works, he had to give a title to these little treatises, which were after the physics. And he called them metaphysics, because meta in Greek, that means after. That's how the title, the name metaphysics appear in appear in philosophy. It had just an editorial meaning at the beginning. And it was only afterwards that the word metaphysics was up to design a special area in the philosophy, a special field which deals with the things which are beyond the experience. God, intelligible forms, substances, and things like that. Now, when Descartes writes in the 17th century his philosophy works, he says he's going to do something else than Aristotle and Plato, but Aristotle and Plato, of course, didn't understand anything and he, Descartes, built a real philosophy, but he stays in the Aristotle and Plato's tradition when he described the philosophy as a tree, because he says there is metaphysics at the root of philosophy, and then physics derives from metaphysics. This is the trunk, and the other field of philosophy, the other branches derive from metaphysics and physics. These are moral, medicine, and mechanics. So in the time of Descartes, philosophy would imply all the fields of knowledge. And this started to change at the end of the 18th century, at the end of the 17th century, sorry, and more in 18th and 19th century. Because at the end of the 17th century appeared Newton. And with Newton, the physics becomes something independent from philosophy. Newton never interested himself in metaphysics problems. He wanted just to deal with physics. He wanted to explain natural phenomenon with the help of mathematics. As you know, and as I remembered you last time, he unified the Kepler's laws, which described the moving of the planets around the sun as an ellipse. And this Kepler's established with the help of experience, observations, and he wanted to unify the Kepler's laws with Galileo's laws. Galileo's laws explained how the corpses are moving on the Earth, which law they are following when they are getting down. So Newton unified the laws of Kepler's laws and Galileo's laws in one unique law, the law of universal gravity. I guess we say, I guess we say like this in English. Loi de gravitation universelle in French. Loi universelle de gravitation, sorry. So with Newton, physics has its independence from philosophy. The thinkers were not conscious of this immediately. I mean, in the 18th century, which is the century of enlightenment, Newton was still regarded as a philosopher. He was still regarded as a philosopher, as a very great philosopher, as the master of the century. But they say what is very important in Newton, this is like, for instance, D'Alembert wrote, you know, D'Alembert, he wrote a preface to a French very important book, which is called the Encyclopédie. This is a book which is aimed at dealing with all the fields of knowledge. And he was, the publishing of this book was directed by D'Alembert and Diderot. And D'Alembert wrote a preface, a very famous preface to this book. And he explained that what Newton made the others understand, it is that knowledge derives from experience. And the second master for the thinkers of the Enlightenment, it is Locke. Locke defended in the field of, let's say, of human understanding, he defended, he supported the same point of view like Newton, because Locke supported the point of view that all our knowledges are derived from experience, precisely from sensation and reflection. I'm not going to explain in details Locke's philosophy because it would take too much time. But what is very important, he rejected metaphysics as something which is dealing with things which are beyond the experience. Locke believed that all our knowledge can be derived from experience. As Voltaire wrote in the Letters of Philosophy, he was a disciple from Locke, and he wrote something like this: after all the thinkers have made the Roman of philosophy, Locke arrived and wrote the philosophy as it is. So Voltaire explained that before Locke, philosophy was just dealing with abstract fictions on which nobody would agree. And thanks to Locke, the thinkers have found a path which will lead to knowledge. And this is in all fields of knowledge, but also in law. So it's not in the 18th century that laws follows this point of view of dealing only with experience, but progressively, as the end of the 18th century arrives, and then the 19th century, law right is becoming to be independent from metaphysics and from philosophy, and pretending to the thinkers, the lawyers, they think that law in itself can be explained with the help of positive law and doesn't need metaphysics. I don't know why it was only in the 18th century that this point of view was supported with John Austin. Why not already in the 18th century? But I have maybe an explanation, but I'm not sure my explanation is right. Enlightenment in the 18th century had a different, was not the same in every European country. In England, Enlightenment was associated, was linked with Locke and with the point of view that our knowledge derives only from experience. This point of view was broadly shared in France with thinkers like Voltaire or Diderot and other thinkers also. But you must know that Enlightenment, it was not only a philosophy treatise. Enlightenment was broadcasted through various forms of literature. There were poems, essays, dialogues, treatises, and the philosophy of Enlightenment is not only a philosophy treatise. Locke wrote a philosophy treatise, like an essay on human understanding, or treatises of civil government. But Voltaire liked better to express himself in poems, like Lisbon, the poems of Lisbon, or like the fairy tales or the tales, like Candide or Zadig, which were philosophical tales. And Diderot, he wrote articles or dialogues, like the Neveu de Rameau, Rameau's nephew, or Jacques the Fatalist. And it was the same with Rousseau. Rousseau wrote Émile, for instance. Émile is not a philosophical treatise. Émile is just an essay. So there were various forms in France in the 18th century of expressing enlightenment. Now, the point of view shared by French thinkers and English thinkers, it was that our knowledge derives from experience. And we must not look for objects which are beyond experience, because they are beyond our knowledge. It doesn't mean that the thinkers of the 18th century didn't believe in God. This is nothing to do without it. You can believe without knowing. You can have the faith even if you don't know how God is, and you can not experience God. So the point of view shared by most of the thinkers of the Enlightenment is that God exists. But they don't think you can get proofs of God's existence. On the contrary of Descartes, who wrote in his metaphysical meditations that there were 3 proofs of God's existence. And he endeavors to demonstrate that the existence of God can be proved. This, the thinkers of the Enlightenment don't believe it, but they believe in God. Now, in Germany, the Enlightenment took a shape which was very different from France and England. Because in Germany, the prominent thinker of the 18th century, of the end of the 17th century and the beginning of 18th century, was Leibniz. And Leibniz, well, let's say, I wouldn't say he was against experience, but he thought, like Descartes, that we have innate ideas which existed before the experience. And so the experience was only there to confirm the ideas that which we had already in ourselves. He was a supporter of the innate ideas. On the contrary, Locke criticized in all the page of of his treatise of human understanding, he criticized the way, he criticized the idea that we have, he criticized the point of view that we have innate ideas. So enlightenment in Germany took a very different form, shape than in England and in France. Of course, Leibniz died in the first period of the 18th century, but he had a scholar, a pupil, I don't know how to say. His name was Wolff, and Wolff continued the philosophy of Leibniz. And Wolff is not a very important thinker by himself, but he is important with the influence he had on the thought in Germany, because he was teaching Leibniz philosophy. And his treatises, they were just like, let's imagine a lawyer, a professor of law, which has very famous law books, and every student has its books on his desk. Now, with Wolff, it was just the same in the field of philosophy. Every philosophical student has the Wolff's books on his desk. And everybody was taught in Wolff's philosophy, provided he studied philosophy, of course. Now, Locke hadn't any success in Germany. That's why we can say after Ernst Cassirer, I told you about Ernst Cassirer last week, I guess. He was a very famous philosopher of the 19th century, but he wrote a book about the philosophy of enlightenment. And he wrote in this book, Kant could only be born in Germany, because Kant, he rejected Locke's point of view that our knowledge derives from experience. From Kant, it's not exact. We are giving the laws to the objects, and the objects are not giving the law to us. This is a fundamental point of view in Kant's philosophy. We call this the Copernican revolution. This is the Copernican revolution. This is the word Kant used in the Critique of the Pure Reason. He said we must make a Copernican revolution. That means that we must understand that we are giving the laws to the objects, and not the objects are giving the laws to us. So Locke's point of view, that means that our knowledge is derived from experiment, is not an accurate point of view. But this is because Kant was German. He was born in Germany, in Königsberg, you know us. Now it's not Germany, it's Russian, for the time being. We'll see. No. And Königsberg means Kaliningrad today. Now it's just a naval base, but it was a cultural center before Putin. And Kant was raised with the knowledge of Wolff's philosophy. So I don't say that Kant is just following the path, Wolff's path. This is not exact. Kant is very important in the history of philosophy because he made huge changements in philosophy. but this I'm not going to develop now. But what is said that our knowledge doesn't derive from experience, but we are us giving the laws to experience, this is a point of view which could be supported in Germany, but not in France or in England. Because in France and in England, the thinkers were under the influence of Locke. Now, Kant is the prominent figures in philosophy at the end of 18th century. And after Kant's death, the philosophers they are starting with Kant's philosophy. Either they are against Kant's philosophy, or they are supporting Kant's philosophy. They are always thinking regarding to Kant's philosophy. So Kant is very important because he makes a so huge changement in philosophy thought that all the authors after Kant are thinking philosophy with the help of Kant, either to criticize Kant or to support him. So in the field of law, we will get back to this point later, Kant was a supporter of natural law. Let's say the thing is very simple. He was a supporter of natural law. Well, his thought is much more complicated than I just say when I say he's a supporter of natural law, but he didn't agree with the thesis that there will be only one law, the positive law, the human laws. You remember the distinction he made in his doctrine of right between the question, what is right and what is legal? The distinction shows he didn't believe that law could be reduced to positive law. He thought there was some principles independent from experience which explain the law, that positive law derives from an idea of law which is independent from experience. That's why he distinguished the two questions, what is right and what is legal, saying that what is right, this is a task of the philosopher to answer it, while the question, what is legal, this is the lawyer's task to answer to this question. And the lawyer's task is only to answer to this question because the lawyer is dealing with experience. He has an experience science. It's not even a science, it's a technique. He's just a specialist worker. So he's dealing with experience and he cannot answer to the question, what is right by itself? What is justice? When the lawyer is dealing with positive law, with laws which are enforced, he cannot ask himself whether the law are just or unjust. This is not his task. He's just a worker. He's not a very clever man, the lawyer for Kant. He's not somebody who thinks really, who really thinks. He's just a technician. Now, because of the influence of Kant, the idea that philosophy of law could derive only from the observation of positive law rose only in the 19th century. Because under Kant's influence, this was impossible. But progressively, in the 19th century, Kant lost part of his influence. Because, of course, the philosopher took Kant's thought as a starting point of view. Either they would criticize his philosophy, or they will follow his philosophy, criticizing his philosophy, Hegel, for instance, or Schelling, following his philosophy to a certain point, this is Schopenhauer or Fichte. So, but all the name I spoke about, all name of German philosophers, right? But the philosophy is mainly in Germany. There are thinkers in other countries. So in France, for instance, Kant was not very known in the 19th century. The works of Kant's works began to be translated in France around 1850. And in England, I don't know when Kant's work were translated, but I guess that in England, Kant has not so much influence like in Germany. So what appeared progressively in the 19th century, and at first in England, this is not surprising, it is that there is not such a thing like metaphysics of law. Kant didn't speak about philosophy of law. He used the word metaphysics of right or metaphysics of law. First principle metaphysical principle of the doctrine of right. This is the title of his book, translated in English. So he thought that a philosophy of law should be a metaphysic. But in the 19th century in England, Kant had not the influence it had in Germany. So this is why I guess that the philosophy of positive law, I mean legal theory or theory of law, meaning the positive law, the human law, this started in England with Austin. And then only Austin works started to be known abroad, and under the influence of Austin, the same trend of thought developed itself in Germany, in France, in Austria, in Switzerland, and in other countries. That's the way legal theory developed itself. So in Germany, it was rather in the 20th century with Kelsen, Hans Kelsen. You have Austria. This is just the same. It was before the Anschluss, but Hans Kelsen. But there was also thinkers in Germany. And you know, Kelsen, his most famous work bears the title Pure Theory of Right, Pure Theory of Right, or Pure Theory of Law. I don't know how it is translated in English. Why pure? because as Kelsen writes in the very first pages of his book, the pure theory of right deals only with the law as it is, with the right as it is, and as not as it ought or could be. So pure theory of right, because Kelsen says I'm dealing only with existing law and not with the laws of the right as it ought to be or could be. The law as they ought to be or as they could be is just a problem of justice, and justice is a controversial notion. Nobody agrees about justice. So if I want to build a real theory of law, it must be pure from consideration deriving from an idea of justice, which is controversial, because nobody agrees about what is justice. This is what Kelsen writes in the first beginning of his book. Now, pure theory of law, of course, when you read the title Pure Theory of Law, you think of Kant, critics of pure reason. But it has nothing to do with Kant. Pure theory of law or pure theory of right, for Kelsen, it means that a real theory of law, a real scientific theory of law, must not deal with justice by itself, because justice by itself is something controversial, and the science must be void of controversial notions. Now, this was Kelsen, first in Austria, and after the Anschluss in the United States, because he was Jew when he had to immigrate when Germany made, the Nazis made the Anschluss. Anschluss, this is the unification of Germany and Austria in 1938. Now, there were also thinkers in Switzerland which share this point of view. The most famous is Ernst Roguin. He was Swiss, but he wrote in French, because in Switzerland we have several languages. So he wrote in French, and he wrote a book which title I could translate in English was I think The Pure Law of the Pure Right. What does it mean by pure? It means just the same than Kelsen. It means that a real theory of law must be void of subjective controversial notion like justice. And now this trend of thought spread to France and to Belgium with Jean Dabin. This is very famous writer, a Belgian writer, and he also wrote a book which title was, he wrote two books. First book, the title was Philosophy of Legal Positive Order. Philosophy of Legal Positive Order. The title of book shows he's going to deal only with positive law. And then after the Second World War, he wrote another book, which title is, General Theory of Law. General Theory of Law. And now this way of thinking law spread in France. There are several authors who wrote books which title is General Theory of Law. General Theory of Law. So you have several books in France. And these books are written by lawyers and not by philosophers. They are written by people who don't know a lot about philosophy. They never open a book from Kant or Plato, and they think because of their knowledge of positive law, they are the best entitled to deal with the question of what is really law. So I say Kant, Plato are nice people, of course, but they are just dreamers, you know. They are just dreamers. And we are dealing with the real law. They are dealing with the skies. And we are dealing with the earth, the real law. This was already the point of view of Austin's point of view. And so, if we come back to the two questions, Kant distinguished in his book, Doctrine of Right, first metaphysical principles of Doctrine of Right. If we come back to these two questions, Kant said there are two questions. The question, what is legal? And this is the lawyer's task to answer to it. And the question, what is right? And this is what is right. That means what is justice by itself? What is the universal criterion of justice and injustice? And this is the philosopher's task to answer to it. Now, that meant in the Kant's language that lawyers are unable to explain, to clarify the concept of law, the concept of right, and the concept of law by itself. Only the philosopher is able to do this. And now with the supporter of legal theory or general theory of law, you have just the contrary. What are they saying? They are saying that the philosophers, the metaphysicers, they are dealing with the law as it ought to be, but not the real law. What is actually law? This is the answer only lawyers can give by dealing with the positive law. So the supporter of legal theory, theory of law, jurisprudence, they think they are the only who are qualified to deal with the law by itself. And the others, they are just dealing with a dream, with an idea of justice, which is not realistic. So this is just the contrary of Kant. Kant thought the lawyers couldn't deal with the law, the right as it is, with the law as it is by itself, and only philosophers could deal with it. And if we take the trend of law theory, legal theory, jurisprudence, which spread in the 19th century, first in England and then in other European countries, this is just the contrary. So what is actually law? This is the lawyer's task to answer to this question. And they have to answer to this question by deriving the concept of law from the experience from positive law. Now, the metaphysic of law, the metaphysic of right, this is just a fiction which can be left to the philosophers who are, of course, just dreamers. Because what is justice by itself? This is a controversial notion. Nobody agrees with it. But positive law, this is something firm. You know, you have positive law. You have the code before in front of you. So you can, by reading the code and the different laws, the different codes, you can get an idea of what is law by itself, generally speaking. Now, this is how legal theory developed in the 18th century, in the 19th century, and the 20th century. Now, there is something strange about legal theory or jurisprudence, something contradictory, I would say. It is that the supporter of legal theory or jurisprudence, they think their thought is independent from philosophy. That you can build a general theory of law without the help of philosophy. That they are just natural. They are dealing with what is actually law, and they don't venture themselves in controversial notions like justice or natural law. This is their point of view. So they think they are independent of philosophy, and they are following a general trend of independence, the trend which the trend that the sciences which were parts of Descartes' tree are now independent. But they are just deluding themselves when they think they are independent from philosophy. Because even when they support the point of view, when they pretend that the only real law is positive law, they are under the influence of philosophers. But they are unconscious of it. And that's what we are going to see after the break, 10 minutes break. If you have any questions after the break, just ask in English, please. Now, I would like to explain you in about 10 minutes how there is a delusion in the idea that legal theory is independent from philosophy. I put this share, especially that people don't go there, because one of your cameras left her laptop here. So of course, the supporter of legal theory thought they get independence from metaphysics and from philosophy by developing a legal theory. But the reality is that they are under the influence of some current, some trend in philosophy without knowing it, maybe. Sometimes without even knowing it. Because the idea that the only right, the only law is positive law is a very old idea. It's not born in the 19th century in Europe. It is born in Greece in the 6th century before Christus. And in the 6th century before Christus, in Athens, as you might know, there was a great development of philosophy. But before Socrates and before Plato, there were people who called themselves Sophists, the Sophists. And they had a very important influence in Athens in the 16th century before Christus. In the 5th century before Christus, sorry. Now, who are the Sophists? You must not think that Sophists are just what we call today Sophists. So when we say Sophists, we are speaking about people today who are dealing with false reasons, who are saying things which are untrue. Or we could say, for instance, that Trump is a sophist, or supporters of Trump are sophists, or Mélenchon is a sophist. But this is a pejorative way of speaking about sophists. The sophists in the 5th century before Christus in Athens were not regarded as people unworthy, as unworthy people. Sophist, it means in Greek, it means somebody who is clever. It means somebody who is clever. Now, the sophists, they pretended they are clever in thought. The sophists, they pretended they are clever in thought. So they pretended they are going to teach the people how to think in a proper way. This was the sophist. Were the sophists philosopher or not? This is a quarrel which is very old. They were not regarded as philosophers by Socrates or by Plato or by Aristotle. They were regarded as the enemy of philosophy, the enemies of philosophy. And this is how they were regarded after Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. I mean, Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates criticized so sharply the sophists that the idea remained that the sophists are not real thinkers, they are just opportunists, people who are saying things which are not untrue just in order to convince the naive. That's the way we understand sophists today. But there were serious thinkers, although Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle didn't like them. So the tradition after Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle is to regard the sophists are people which are not real, who are not real philosophers, who a man should avoid to encounter, and whose thoughts were untrue. But this is not the way they were regarded in Athens in the 5th century before Christus. For instance, the political leader in most of the 5th century before Christus was Pericles, as you may know, Pericles, and among his friends were sophists, like the very famous Protagoras. He was a sophist, and he was a friend of Pericles. And Protagoras was so friend with Pericles that Pericles gave him a mission to give laws to a Greek city in South Italy. Because the Greeks, they have founded colonies in other places than in Greece, especially in Italy. So Protagoras was given the mission by Pericles to give laws to a city, the city of Turioi, which was in Italy, in south of Italy. So the Sophists were not regarded as, now we think Sophists are just people you cannot believe who are telling peanuts, and this was not the way they were regarded in the 5th century. But are they really philosophers or not? This is another question. Hegel, for instance, thought that the Sophists were philosophers, and very important philosophers, who explained the developing of thought in antique Greece, in ancient Greece. So, are they philosophers or not? This can be discussed. But if we now leave the Sophists in a global view and we think about the relation the Sophists had with the law, with the right, they were unanimous to think that there is only one right, one law. It is the human law, the positive law. For the Sophists, justice means lawfulness. What is just is what is legal. Lawfulness and justice are just the same thing. We will speak longer about the Sophists later, but I can already quote a sentence from Antiphon the Sophist. This is a sentence which he wrote in a book we lost. It's a lost book, but the sentence remained. The sentence was found in a papyrus, the Oxyrhynchos papyrus, and this sentence is the following. Justice consists in not violating any of the legal rules accepted by the city of which one is a part. Justice consists in not violating any of the legal rules accepted by the city of which one is a part. What does it mean? It means there is nothing else in justice than what the human laws are prescribing. Justice, just and legal are just the same thing. Justice is nothing other than lawfulness. So we have in the Sophist thought or what we call today positivism. Legal positivism, the Sophists have developed it long before the 19th century. They already said that there is only one law, the positive law. And they rejected, the Sophists, they rejected any transcendence, any truth by itself. They thought that there was no truth by itself, that there was no transcendence, and they wanted to deal only with human phenomena. So they rejected a justice by itself because they thought there was no truth by itself, no justice by itself. As one of the most famous sophists wrote, and we will come back to him later, Protagoras, I wrote it in the chat, he wrote, man is the measure of all things. Man is the measure of all things. Man is the measure of all things. Alors, what is the man for Protagoras? The man is the individual. So, for instance, we are here in a classroom. Maybe you are cold. Maybe I'm warm. I'm cold because I have my mantle. So I feel here the temperature is cold, but you are thinking the temperature is warm. Maybe somebody else here thinks the temperature is neither cold nor warm, and everybody is right. Everybody is right. It's just a matter of sensation, of feeling. But with the justice, it's just the same. What you think is just is not maybe what I think is just. It's just a matter of point of view. So how can we determine if something is just or not? Something which is just something which is ordered, prescribed by the laws, by the Roman laws. Because if the human law prescribes something, there's no discussion. You must obey the law, and that's all. So there's nothing like, nothing such justice by itself. There is only lawfulness. Because justice, truth, are a matter of a point of view. And everybody has this point of view. You have a point of view about justice. The other people have also. Maybe a monkey has a point of view about justice. It's an example given by Plato in one dialogue. He says, well, Protagoras said that man is the measure of all things. But he could have written that the monkey is a measure of all things. He's not less qualified than any man. Huh? He doesn't say monkey, he says babouin. You know this word in English? Cynocephale. It's you know these monkeys with a long nose you see in zoo. Huh? We call them cynocephales, but there was a French searcher whose name was Buffon, and he was a biologist, and he gave a name to species. And the cynocephales, it is a complicated name, so he called them babouin. He called them babouin because he knows somebody whose name was babouin. He didn't like him, so he called these monkeys babouin. It's true. This is a true story. That's why we call them now babouin. But the real name, it's a Greek name, it's cynocephales. That means in Greek, they have a head of a dog. Kluon, this is a dog in Greek. A cephale, this is the head. Now, justice is just a matter of point of view, like everything else. So there is not any criterion of justice except what the human law prescribes. This is positivism. This is legal positivism. And we are in the 5th century before Christus. Now you have the the supporters of legal theory who are coming in the 19th century, in the 20th century, and they say we have invented something very original. We think that the only law is positive law. Yes, you are very clever, but sorry, but there's nothing new in this. If you knew philosophy, if you had learned philosophy instead of law, of positive law, you would know that you are not the first to say this. And now there is a second origin in legal positivism in modern times, not in the ancient Greece. It is the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, he was a philosopher which was especially interested in law and political philosophy. So much interested he was that he wrote 3 times the same book. But he developed it more and more. He wrote at first the elements of law, in which he expounded his political philosophy. And then he wrote a second book on the citizen, titled On the Citizen. And it was just the same, but more developed. And then he published some years later his masterwork, which is very famous, Leviathan. Leviathan, this is a bigger On the Citizen. So he wrote 3 times the same version, but he developed. And he was so proud of his Leviathan that he wrote it in English, but also in Latin. Now, this Leviathan, I'm not going to explain all the Leviathan. This is not possible. This is impossible. But I want to remind you one of his keys theory. And first of all, you must understand that he was not a lawyer, he was a philosopher. So as he explains, for instance, in the Leviathan, his aim, his purpose is not to show what is law here or there. It is to explain what is law, generally speaking. So he's making a theory of law. He says that the study of the different laws, this is the lawyer's task. And he's a philosopher, he's dealing like Plato, he says, like Aristotle, he says, I'm dealing with the law, generally speaking, with the law in general. Now, he's not examining, he's not observing. Let's avoid this word. That's better. It's 1 hour and a half, so I must be careful now with my English. So he avoids I'm avoiding, sorry, a term which is too complicated. So he's explaining us, he will not describe the human laws, the various human laws in United Kingdom or in France or elsewhere. He will deal with the law, generally speaking. But he adds, unlike Aristotle and Plato, I don't think there is something like an idea of justice. I'm simplifying a lot. So he says, well, the mistake which was made by Plato and Aristotle It is to think that there are ideas which are separated, concept, realities, which are separated from its subject. For instance, it's not Hobbes who is speaking, but I'm explaining. For instance, if we says a law is just, there is not something like justice by itself. The law is just only related to the guy who made it, the lawmaker. So justice is only what the lawmaker prescribes and nothing else. There is nothing like an intelligible form of justice, a substance of justice, because these are metaphysical concepts which have no reality. Hobbes is a contender of metaphysics. He is opposed to metaphysics. This is the 17th century. It's before the Enlightenment. But he was already a staunch critical of metaphysics. He says the mistake, Aristotle's mistakes, Plato's mistakes, it was to believe of something, some realities which are beyond experience. And there are no such things. There are no things like substance or intelligible forms like Aristotle and Plato pretend. There are only physical phenomena, and we must stay in the study of physical phenomena. Now, law, human law is just a physical phenomenon. So it obliged because there are somebody, a lawmaker, who has made prescriptions. And there is nothing such like justice by itself. Justice must be related to the lawmaker. So justice is only what the lawmaker says is just or unjust. There is nothing else. Now, Hobbes doesn't deny there is a natural law. So it distinguishes natural law and natural right. So it begins to be a little complicated. Natural right for Hobbes is just the law of the strongest. Natural law, it means natural right, sorry, it means you do anything you want. So before the society, the political society, it was natural right. So anybody did what he wanted. He wanted to kill his neighbor, he killed his neighbor, and everything like this. So the man is a wolf. How would you say wolf in English? Wilk, wolf. A man is a wolf to the other man. So he does what he wants and doesn't take care if he makes harm or not. This is not his problem. This is natural right. This is jungle law, natural law. Now, Hobbes says, besides natural right, there is natural law. Natural law is something else. Natural law is just a moral law which obliges us to be kind, to make no harm to the others. This is natural law. But natural law doesn't exist in the state of nature. In the state of nature, when there is no civil political society, in the state of nature, it is natural right which prevails. Everybody makes what he wants. He wants to steal, he wants to kill, he will kill, he will steal. Now, natural law can be effective only in a civil society. That means that natural law is efficient only if it's contained in a civil law, in a human law, a positive law in civil society. There is no natural law in a state of nature. In a state of nature, there is only jungle law. Everybody makes what he wants. This is a state of war of each of everybody against everybody. It's the state of war of everybody against everybody. This is the state of nature, because this is in the state of nature, it is the right of nature who reigns. Now, the law of nature, which is a law of reason, which prescribes us not to harm the others, the law of nature is only effective in a civil society, because in a civil society, you have a power who obliges the people to obey the natural law. The natural law can be effective only in a civil society. What does it mean if we use modern words? It means that for Hobbes, there is nothing like a real natural law. There's only a civil law, a positive law, and the source of any justice in his civil law, because without a civil law, it's just a state of war. A natural law has a meaning only when it's contained in a civil law. Otherwise, there is no effective natural law, doesn't exist. This is a state of nature. So if we can't speak about a natural law, it's only when natural law is effective because it's contained in the civil law, which obliges everybody because there is a threat to be punished. So what does it mean? Hobbes was the founder of modern legal positivism. He was the founder of modern legal positivism. Many centuries after the end of the Sophists, we have another thinker who come back to positivism and makes legal theory, and according to him, the only real law, it is positive law. Now, John Austin, the founder of legal theory in the 19th century in England, was a reader of Hobbes. He knew Hobbes. He didn't read Kant or Plato or Aristotle, too complicated for him. He couldn't deal with it. But Hobbes, first of all, Hobbes wrote in English, so that was easier. And then Hobbes, it's a philosopher who is not very hard to understand. He's very carré, we say in French. So it's very clear. He has a very good style and is quite easy to understand. Kant, this is another, it's much more difficult, you know. So John Austin, he didn't read Kant. He didn't read Kant, but Hobbes, he read. So he understood Hobbes. He understood approximatively Hobbes. And what he retained from Hobbes, it is that the only real law, it is positive law. So we have a trend in philosophy of law, which legal theory represents, but legal theory pretends itself to be independent from philosophy. But unfortunately, legal theory finds its roots in philosophical thought. In Sophists, okay, Sophists are they real philosophers or not? We can discuss about it, but they are not lawyers, or they are not only lawyers. That's clear. Sophists on the one hand, and Hobbes on the other hand. Hobbes is a philosopher. Sorry, it's a great philosopher. It's not a guy like John Austin, but John Austin, he was a barrister, and then he came from philosophy. You know, it's like this: you are starting to be a barrister. Then you have less success, you earn less money, so you say it's maybe it's time to do something else, and you make and you become a teacher in law, and you make philosophy of law, you know. So. But most of the time it's too late, you know. You are starting to make philosophy of law, you are already 60. And it's not a time to read Plato or Aristotle or Kant. If you want to understand Kant, you have to start at 25, at least, at last. 25, the latest. I read Kant. It needs 3 years. Sorry, to understand a little Kant, it's 3 years. So if you take a passage about Kant, you think you have understood Kant. Unfortunately, you have just a very vague impression of what Kant meant exactly. And this is the same with Plato or Aristotle. First of all, if you don't know Greek, you cannot understand Plato or Aristotle, sorry. And if you don't read German, it's very difficult to understand Kant. So the people should be humble, you know. I'm dealing with philosophy of law. I'm 70 because I have not succeeded as a barrister. So I'm going to write something about philosophy of law. Spadaj, we say in Polish. It means spadaj means laisse tomber. Laisse tomber, putain. So, this is a French traduction. Anybody can devote himself to philosophy of law, but everybody must be serious. And if you want to deal with philosophy of law, you must take in account thinkers who wrote about philosophy of law before you, and try to understand what they wrote instead of thinking you are going to have original ideas which were not presented before. When you read books about theory of law, legal theory, I don't speak about Kelsen, but Kelsen he has a real thought. But Kelsen, this is very complicated. You know, the books of Kelsen, Kelsen's books, it's just you put them on the wall here, and the entire wall. If you want to study Kelsen in details, you don't study anything else. He wrote like I'm drinking, you know. He wrote all the time. But Kelsen, he was a real thinker. A little complicated, but he was a real thinker. But if you take most of the general theory of law in French, for instance, this is always the same. Well, we are not going to deal with Plato, Aristotle, but these guys, they are too complicated. They are just philosophers, and we are dealing with the real law, the positive law. Okay. And now, what is justice when we look at the civil laws, the human laws? Well, it's the equality, distributive justice, commutative justice, progress, and when I go to the coffee here in Rue d'Assas, and I have the same thing. I don't need to read a book to know this. So the general theory of law are often weak if we speak about the principles on which they are built. This is a problem, because there is a lack of culture, of philosophy culture from the authors. I don't put all the the lawyers who are writing about law theory in the same bag. There are real thinkers like Kelsen, for instance, or in a bibliography I gave you, there is Friedman, Legal Theory. His book is Legal Theory. He's a real thinker. He's very good. But Friedman, it is a guy who read Hobbes, who read a little of Plato, and he has a culture. He has a culture. Now, let's stop to speak about nothing, just but we must retain. The problem of legal theory, it is that legal theory pretends to be scientifical neutral. They don't deal with subjective concept, with controversial concept like justice, because they want to deal with the law as it is, the right as it is, and not as it ought to be or could be, okay? But they are not neutral. They are not neutral because they are following the path of people who supported the point of view that the only real law was positive law, and these people were thinkers or philosophers and not lawyers. So legal theory is not more neutral than philosophy. It is just a choice. And everybody can make a choice, but he has to justify his choice. Either in law or in philosophy, when you make a choice, you justify in choice. When Kant wrote the Critique of Pure Reason, and he wrote in the preface of his book that we should make a Copernican revolution, it means that the subject is giving the law to the objects and not the objects to the subject, but he justified it. 600 pages. Sorry, 600 pages. So when John Austin says the only law is positive law, and I'm throwing the natural law, which is just something fancied, there is a problem because he wrote this in 3 pages. It's very clear, it's very logical, but it doesn't justify his postulates. It's just an hypothesis of work. There is only one real law, effective law, it's positive law, and I'm not going to deal with natural law, which is just a fiction, just a fancy. Okay, but you have to justify this. In other terms, you cannot spare the necessity of having a global vision when you speak about philosophy of law. You cannot avoid the problem of a global vision of a universe, of the knowledge, and this is the global vision you have of the knowledge, Weltanschauung, we say in German, the global vision of a universe, of the world, of the knowledge, and this commands the way you are going to approach the law in general. Or you are just a dogmatic. You didn't understand anything about philosophy. Because the starting point of any philosophy, it's doubt. Doubt. You have to doubt. And then maybe you find the truth. Not sure. The skeptical, because, for instance, they think there is no truth. No truth that we can know. Or maybe there is a truth, but you have at first to doubt. There is a very different way of thinking between the philosophers and the lawyers. When you hear a lawyer in a conference, he's developing his speech with very much assurance. He never doubts. A philosopher, he starts to doubt. He doesn't know. And he must look for a way to acquire the truth, but it's not sure to acquire the truth. Maybe there is no truth, but he asks himself. Now, philosophy of law cannot be a way of saying truth without having before justified this truth. And that's the philosophers who are interested in law, it is what they are making. They are just putting questions, and they try to understand, to answer to the question. They are not sure they understand, they answer properly, but they don't start with hypotheses or postulates which they pretend they are exact. This is not a good way of thinking in philosophy of law, in the field of philosophy of law. Now, this leads me to the third point of this general introduction. The choice between legal theory and philosophy of law, the choice. I must be understood. I don't say there is, it's a different of approach. You have understood. The legal theory, it is a science which pretends to deal with the law in general, the right in general, without the help of philosophers. The philosophy of law, properly speaking, pretends that dealing with the law, that the problem of law is just a part of a global problem, like the tree of Descartes, the Descartes tree. This is just a branch, and this branch depends on the metaphysic. It's not something independent apart. This is the point of view of the philosopher. So, have we to make a choice? I don't know. I have no idea. I have no idea. Generally speaking, I have no idea. If I had ideas, I'm 68, so 67, sorry. So I think if I had ideas, I would be famous. So I'm not famous. It means I have no ideas. But I think we must be humble. And humble, it means we have to watch, understand how the philosophers fought the problem of law since the Greece. And then, eventually, we can make a choice or not make a choice. So, I have nothing against legal theory, but I think lectures on philosophy of law must be a little historical. So we have to understand what the great thinkers thought of the problem of justice and law. And by great thinkers, I'm not speaking about Austin or guys like this. I'm speaking about Plato, Aristotle, Heraclitus, of Ephesus, Kant, and people like this, Hobbes. These are great thinkers. Let's try to understand what they meant by law in general, and then we can make our choice eventually. So the third question, I answer that I'm going to give lectures of philosophy of law and not of legal theory. These are not two separate sciences. It's just the same science. It's only a different approach of view. But I'm going to stop here because I have a colleague who wants to make his course, his lectures. So we'll meet again next week if you are here. Thanks. I'm not sure I deserve this approach, but thanks a lot.